Welcome to this virtual event, Standing with Afghan Women and Ensuring Meaningful Inclusion in the upcoming Intra-Afghan Peace Talks. I'm Madeleine, the director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And we're so pleased to be joined today in co-hosting this event with CourtAid, a leading Dutch relief and development organization that is working in some of the most conflict-torn countries, including Afghanistan. As we all know, this is a particularly critical moment to call attention to the importance of Afghan women's participation in the anticipated peace talks. We will hear shortly from two Afghan women leaders who will provide an on-the-ground perspective from Kabul. We will also hear from diplomats who have been engaged on Afghanistan, who will describe the stakes not only for Afghanistan, the region, but for, indeed, the world. If Afghan women are marginalized and their rights jeopardized, the stakes are enormous. We have close to 1,000 viewers joining us from 80 countries today. They include peace negotiators, officials of governments and multilateral organizations, grassroots activists, many representatives of Afghan civil society, journalists, and more. And I want to welcome each and every one of you in the audience. Before we hear from our speakers, just a quick program note. We have already received many pre-submitted questions from our audience. You will have an opportunity to submit additional questions to the speakers throughout the discussion. Use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and just tell us your name, organization, and to whom you are directing your question. And now to our opening speaker. Madeleine Albright served as the 64th U.S. Secretary of State, the first woman to be nominated to that post. Prior to becoming Secretary of State, she was the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. And I might add that in that role, she headed the U.S. delegation to the 4th UN World Conference that took place in Beijing on women, and that took place 25 years ago this year. She is a best-selling author many times over, the chair of the National Endowment for Democracy and deeply committed to democracy and the state of the world, and a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award in the United States. I must add, of course, that she is a distinguished Georgetown professor in the School of Foreign Service. And for purposes today, I think it's important to note that she has been long engaged on Afghanistan, and she has never forgotten that she came to the United States as a refugee. So, Secretary Albright, please.
Madeleine, thank you very, very much for your introduction and for everything that your team did to organize this event. GWIPS continues to do remarkable work in building the evidence-based case for women's roles in peace building and security, and they have not let the pandemic slow them down. I am grateful for that because even in 2020, one still comes across self-proclaimed experts who consider women's rights to be a marginal concern to the so-called hard issues of big power politics and the military. In reply, all one needs to do is to point to Afghanistan in the 1990s, where the mistreatment of women under the Taliban was not a side issue, but a symptom of something much larger. During my first year in office as Secretary of State, I visited a group of female Afghan refugees. And this was in the mountains of Pakistan, not far from the Khyber Pass. The refugees told me how the Taliban had prevented them from holding jobs, attending school, or even leaving their homes unless accompanied by an adult male. A girl described the death of her sister, who had jumped from a sixth-floor window to avoid being raped. And all of the refugees spoke of their longing to return home and to lead normal lives. I told them that we would do everything we could to help them and that I would never forget them. And that is one reason why I continue to speak out on behalf of Afghan women. And that brings me to today's discussion. As we meet, the parties in Afghanistan are closer than ever to the start of the Intra-Afghan negotiations, which are the key next step to ending Afghanistan's 40-year-long war. There is broad hope in Afghanistan and around the world that these talks will result in a lasting settlement. But this hope is coupled with concern about the price of peace. Consider the enormous progress in the 20 years since the Taliban regime was overthrown. The Taliban banned girls from schooling, and today over 3.5 million girls are enrolled in schools. Women went from being virtually erased to becoming policewomen, teachers, public officials, mayors, and entrepreneurs. Many fear, with good reason, that an agreement with the Taliban could threaten all this progress. So let me be clear, peace cannot be made on the backs of Afghan women. The best way to ensure that doesn't happen is for women to fully participate in the peace process. So what does that mean in practice? It means women need to be a party to the negotiations, not just an issue to be discussed. It means women must be involved throughout every step of the process, and it means that the perspective of women and youth must be reflected in any agreement. These key principles are the foundation of a statement that will be issued in the coming weeks by a group of former officials who have worked to support a stable, safe, and prosperous Afghanistan. We come from many countries and political backgrounds, but we are united by a belief that in order to honor the sacrifices and investments that have been made over many years, we must prioritize the future role of women in Afghanistan, which starts with their substantive involvement in the peace process. So today's discussion could not be better timed, and I'm looking forward to hearing from a very distinguished panel of peacemakers about what we can do to ensure that women are at the table. And I have to say to the women of Afghanistan, we have not forgotten you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary, for those very moving remarks. And I think what we will do now in the discussion is really elaborate on some of the points that you made, why this isn't a side issue. What does meaningful participation actually represent? And so much more. So thank you for that, and thank you for your ongoing deep commitment on this issue. Let's begin now with our esteemed panel. Nargis Nehan is a former Afghan minister for mines, petroleum, and industries. Not usually industries associated with women, I might add. And she was the founder of Equality for Peace and Democracy. She has held several positions in her government beyond the ministry I just mentioned, including in Treasury and in education. And she's been extremely active in Afghan civil society. And we're delighted, Nargis, that you're with us today. Can you explain, as you're sitting there in Kabul, in the midst of all of these discussions that are ongoing about the peace process and whither it goeth and how it's constituted, why is it important to have that process that is inclusive? What is truly at stake for Afghanistan? We're also hearing increased reports that the Taliban are different today, that they've reformed, that they are acting differently in terms of women's rights. I probably one of the best places to look is at those areas in Afghanistan where the Taliban are in considerable control. And tell us, has anything changed for women in those places? What can we learn in terms of what still needs to be deeply understood?
Thank you very much, Virvil. Madam Secretary Albright, Milan Virvil, Stefan De Mistura, Ambassador Barakzai. I have to thank you all very much, first of all, for hosting this program and participating in this important discussion. I also welcome on board and thank all the participants that they are participating in this important discussion from around the countries at this different timing. And I have to convey the message of Afghan women because since morning today, I've been talking with women in 6 different zones of Afghanistan, trying to understand what they are going through, what is the update, and if they have any message for this event. So while they have all sent their regards, and some of the messages that I'll be conveying to all of you during my talking, it's also important that they are all very grateful and they really appreciate all the efforts that our international partners and our international sisters are putting together for making sure that Afghan women voices are heard and Afghan women are not forgotten in the peace process. Now coming to the questions, Virvil, that you have asked, let me make my divide my points in 3 areas so that I can make some of the cases and explain some of the situation and perspective that we have in Afghanistan about the peace process, especially women. So first of all, if we are talking about ending a violence, then of course we are engaging the parties that they are in the conflict to have a settlement, and we focus on ending the violence. But if you want to bring peace and you want to make sure that it's sustainable, it's very much important that beside the parties that they are in conflict, we're also providing equal engagement opportunity for enablers of the peace, so that we can have a balance between those that they have the ideology of the conflict and as well as those that they have the ideology of development and ideology of the peace. Now, in case of Afghanistan, who are those peace enablers that we need to make sure that they are in the process and they are included? The peace enablers are civil society, women groups, youth groups, minorities, private sector, academia, ulama, and all other segments of the society who are actively invested and they are working day and night for development of Afghanistan. It's very much important for us to make sure that beside the Taliban, beside the government, we're also including all these segments of the society in these dialogues to come to a term and decide to end violence, do not harm each other, and make sure that all of us together are moving the country forward. Why in case of Afghanistan, this inclusivity is even more important. Why? Because Afghanistan has been in conflict in the last 4 decades. Now, Taliban are only one of the drivers of the conflict. We have many other drivers of the conflict. So oversimplification of Afghanistan peace process by focusing only on Taliban is going to be very dangerous. And this settlement is not going to get us anywhere, and this will not be a peace, but rather a quick fix with temporary reduction in violence and permanent handing over of Afghanistan to the Taliban that none of us want to do. Now, if we look at the Afghanistan case, also people have the experience of living under the Taliban rule. So we already have experience what is it like to live under rule of an extremist group like Taliban. We have seen what they have done to Afghanistan, especially to Afghan women, and what they have done to the rest of the world. So people are already very fearful, everyone, men and women, as on one hand, they see a rushed peace process, and on the other hand, they see no change in the behavior and ideology of the Taliban. On one hand, they see countries laying red carpets for the Taliban and welcoming them for peace talks. On the other hand, they see that Afghan women are being told that we have to fight for our rights for ourselves, and it's an intra-Afghan issues and has nothing to do with politicians in other countries. So these things are actually increasing anxieties of the people and make them hesitant to support the peace process. It's important that we make sure that the peace enablers are supported in the process, where they build confidence of the people, encourage people to support the peace process, but most importantly, to minimize fears of the people, anxieties of the people, and send a very clear message to the Taliban that Afghanistan will not be abandoned. And if they are thinking of coming and taking over Kabul, they have to take this out of their mind, and they have to think of a peaceful ways to come and try to find ways to come over their differences that they have with the rest of the society and begin to have a peaceful solution for the conflict that we have. So this is important. Now, what is at stake? The second question that you have asked, I believe a lot is at stake. Actually, everything is at stake, but I want to divide them into 4 points that what is at stake. For us, as a country, that we have 63% of our population below 25 years old. Everything is at stake. The future of our generation is at stake, and all the achievements that we have made together with you, with our blood, with our treasure, all of them are at stake. As leaders of women movements, I mean, in Afghanistan and around the country, all of us, our dignity is at stake, our sisterhood is at stake, and all the achievements that we have made, all of them are sacrificed. I really don't know how we will look up to those women that they laid this whole movement, a foundation of movement with their lives, sacrificed their life, if we give in to Taliban's demand and just leave them to rule Afghanistan and treat the women the way they wish to. The third one is, as a residents of Global Village, our universal values of human rights, women's rights, minorities, liberty, and freedom, all of them are at stake. The republic and democracy is at stake. Why? Because what we see is the slow consolidation of religious powers in the region, where actually they might go beyond Afghanistan and begin to consolidate their power to rule the country. Now, unfortunately, you talked about, you asked Madeleine about the Taliban and their ideology and behavior, if you have seen any change. I know there are some of our friends, in order to encourage Taliban and also build confidence of the people and as well as the international community, they keep on saying that there are improvements in Taliban behavior, there are changes in their ideology. But talking to Afghan women in the provinces and living in Afghanistan myself as an Afghan woman with my entire family, let me tell you that unfortunately we see no changes in Taliban ideology, we see no changes in Taliban behavior. Furthermore, what we see is that since the peace deal is signed between the US and the Taliban, they have become actually more rigid. Now, if you look at the figure, in the last 6 months of 2020, we have around 1,200 casualties that has happened. Now, the 43% of these casualties are coming from Taliban attacks. So this itself shows that we don't see any reduction in the violence, and we don't see any changes in Taliban ideology or behavior. And women mobility and movement has really decreased because they have put more restrictions, and already women are very fearful, especially in those areas that Taliban are ruling. They cannot go out without any muharram. They cannot have their mobility, and already the message is sending to them that they should better give in to the way that Taliban would like them to live. So this is what we are hearing and we are witnessing in Afghanistan. Peace is important, but inclusivity of the peace process is very much important in order to make sure it is sustainable. I want to make my point later, because I think according to the timeline that they gave me, my first round is finished.
Thank you so much, Nargis. You gave us a lot of information in your response, and a lot of that will be developed in the conversation as we go forward. I now want to turn to your sister in Afghanistan, to Shukri Abaraksai, who is also in Kabul. She, until most recently, was Afghanistan's ambassador to Norway. She's an Afghan politician and journalist. She began her political career as a participant in the Loya Jirga that went on to adopt the Constitution of Afghanistan, and she was later elected to the lower house of the Afghan parliament, and so much more. But Ambassador Barakzai, maybe we could talk a little bit about the specifics of peace talks. What is the status of the talks today? The current negotiating team. We know negotiations are a give and take, but red lines are important too. And I think in terms of this issue today, perhaps why the red line on women's rights is so critical. So give us a sense of what is happening as the process is unfolding.
Thank you so much. Accept my sincere regards from Kabul, and thank you for the event you made. And thanks for your concern about the Afghan women, because I believe women around the globe, we are united despite of where and which part of the world we are living. As a women activist, and since almost more than 23 years of my life, I spent it to stand for women's and human rights during the Taliban, after the Taliban, before the Taliban. But right now, allow me to say that it seems to me that there's a very dark cloud, although I always try to hope for the light at the end of the tunnel. But about the peace process and status of its current situation, first of all, I must say that Afghan peace process or intra-Afghan talks has not been started yet. So when we are talking about a peace process, there's no official talk been started between Afghans yet. It's a peace process we are having at the moment, dialogue on it. It's just a structure. National reconciliation under leadership of Dr. Abdullah, the Ministry of Peace Affairs under leadership of Abdul Salam Rahimi, and the High Peace Council under leadership of Karim Khalili, and the negotiation team under leadership of Masum Stanigzai. So we have, like, for the time, 4 different addresses in the absence of peace. As much as I know, none of them are strategized for the peace process. And there's a lack of common points of view and the red lines about the peace process among and beside all of them. To be honest, it's sad to see the war victim or any women and human rights activist. Unfortunately, I must say, the current peace process is not a peace process. Because it's a lack of nation voice, very widely visible in the Afghan negotiation team. At the moment, that team is just representing their own political alliance, where they are looking for their own political interest, like their own political interest is the top priority for them, rather than what would be the red line. It's possible anytime they will go and shift the position from the current situation to the Taliban side, as we've been witnessed during the peace talks, always it was possible. For women in Afghanistan, it's very, very, very important to have and keep the red lines. But before I would go to all those red lines that we like to have it, allow me to say, and I hope nobody will be surprised by what is my understanding. Unfortunately, I must say that the current peace process is not a peace process. It's just a peace project for President Trump election campaign, without paying any attention to the sacrifice of US and Afghan military for nearly 2 decades and the huge cost of this war against terror. My homeland has been suffered for over 4 decades in a proxy war. And I strongly believe short-term peace project may not lead Afghanistan to a peace process. It may lead Afghanistan to a long-term proxy war. When it comes about the red lines and sacrifice, first of all, I would love to say the sacrifice of international community, coalition forces, US, Afghans, civilians, and militaries. It's need to be recognized and respect. Why? I think it's the time that every citizens from different country where they've been engaged in Afghanistan, they should ask their government why they've been in Afghanistan and why their people sacrificed their life and why the huge cost of that war was been in their shoulder. Same in Afghanistan. We are asking what peace means without justice. Which kind of peace it will be when they are neglecting and marginalizing more than 60% of the country. As I mentioned to you before, there's no red line been drawn by the government. For instance, Dr. Abdullah was offering to Taliban just the open talk. Nothing can be a frame, but President Ashraf Ghani, he was mentioned, there will be the structure of the government and the value of republic will be a red line for the peace talk. But from my points of view, I think we Afghan women are not asking anyone to bring star from the sky for us. We just want to be accepted and to be recognized as an equal citizen. I believe equality, justice, with the frame and structure of the Afghan constitution will be our red line. I believe the commitment of Afghan women, plus all the international women's rights activists, that they will not leave us alone. I believe sharing democratic values should be our common values. And I really understand that Afghan women not going backward. We believe and we are committed to move forward. So I hope this message will be clear for Taliban and those people were there clapping for terrorist groups to come. We as Afghan women, we would love to, let's say, sacrifice a few things for them. For instance, we would like to accept a terrorist group as a civilian and citizen political group. We are ready. We are really ready to teach them how to be a good citizen. And we would love to work with them with the structure, the government. And of course, we would love justice to take place in my homeland, because without justice, peace may not be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shukria, for your personal perspective, your sobering perspective, for really raising a lot of the tough issues that have to be confronted, that hopefully we will discuss more as we go forward in this conversation. So thank you. I want to turn now to Stefan De Mistura. Welcome, Stefan. It's good to see you. He has more than 3 decades of experience with the UN, working in conflict-affected areas. He's the former UN envoy for Syria that most recently, and earlier Afghanistan and Iraq and Lebanon, all tough places, I might add. In a recent powerful op-ed in the Los Angeles Times that he co-authored, that was titled, "A Taliban Peace Deal, at What Cost?" And he wrote, "To achieve any form of lasting stability, it is imperative that women be included in the negotiating table. Inclusivity means involving those with the most at stake in the process." Stefan, we've talked about what is at stake with the other panelists, but I want to take this beyond Afghanistan, to the region, to the international community, indeed to international peace and stability. So what is the strategic argument, if you will, for the international community at this time? The issue that we've been discussing, in particular women's rights, has so often been marginalized as not a central issue. So give us your perspective on that and its importance.
Thank you so much. And wonderful to be here, and especially for the timing of this meeting and seeing courageous Afghan and determined Afghan women with us on this. Thank you. And you're right. We need to find out, based on what we heard, both from Secretary Albright and from our 2 Afghan partners, some strong, powerful arguments. But are they enough to mobilize the international community at this stage, when we're all distracted by COVID, when we're all distracted by the fact that a long war, which has costed 2.3 or 3 trillion of US dollars and so much blood, should be ended? So I've been thinking myself some arguments, because I come from the West myself, and as you know, I've been myself special envoy in Afghanistan. So the first argument I would use would be the following. You used it. 60% of the population of Afghanistan are women. How can you exclude them? Second argument, it's bad enough for those countries where we know the women don't exercise their own rights to actually not be able to reach the level of other women who are exercising the right. But it's much, much worse when you actually start having the taste, not in 1 month, but 18 years. What does it mean being able to go to school? What does it mean having a profession? What does it mean being an ambassador, a judge, a policeman, a person who is actually talking to the media, and a politician? We have more than 28% of women now in the parliament, and we fought for that. And losing that and going back to the burqa, and we all watching that without moving a finger, that is more than tragic. It's scandalous. Now, we can use another argument, which is linked to COVID. There have been recently, as you know, a tragic event which has been affecting the whole world within a month. 7 billion people have been affected by it. It's called COVID-19. Look at which governments have been able to be most effective. Many of them were led by women. Germany, New Zealand, Denmark, just to mention Finland. Second, think about how much women, doctors and nurses, have made a huge difference when the thing became tragically almost unmanageable. Imagine if we didn't have those women in Afghanistan because they were not allowed to go to school. Imagine that they were not allowed even to have a profession. Now, is that enough to stimulate them? Stimulate all of us, the taxpayers, the people in the West distracted? Well, then we should use another argument, which you have been using. I think Shukria did, is we lost. I lost 6 of my colleagues. The US, I think, lost, sadly, about, the 2,400 soldiers. The UK, 456, altogether more than 3,000 of young men and women who died in Afghanistan, not only because Mr. Bin Laden, that horrible person, was actually hiding there and did what we also, and we all became New Yorkers, you remember, but also because we were outraged by what we saw happening to the women being stoned to death simply because they were listening to music or not walking with their own husband. Now, are we going to forget all that and say, well, you know, we lost that blood, we lost that treasure because we're just turning the page because we want to end it and then going back to that? So that is the way I think we could still push in the right direction. There is one thing. I attended, as you know, at the Tokyo conference in 2012. It was a fundraising conference. And believe me, I noticed what does it mean funding as a stimulating element to make people think twice. The Taliban are obviously aiming at getting into the powerhouse. Human, in their case, they've been fighting for that. They may get or try to get some ministries. They may want to be part, and I hope they will follow Shukria's advice, as a political. They may even tell us that they have changed their opinion about women, although, you know, trust and verify is a good principle there. But imagine that Europe in particular, that's why it's good to have with us the ambassador from Netherlands. Imagine that Europe in particular, but also the US, would say, if you want any funds to Afghanistan after the deal is done, you will not see them. Because you will only see them on the conditional, incremental proof that you are, while you're pretending to take care of women, you're actually allowing them to go to school. You're allowing them to get to a job. And if you don't get the funds, you will lose even your own little popularity you have. That makes them blink. And our conscience makes us feel better because we are not just begging them, we are actually arguing with a very valid argument. Our taxpayers cannot accept simply to say goodbye, all that is forgotten, we forgot the Afghan women, and that's it. No. Last point. One Afghan woman recently in London she was a journalist, and at a certain point she raised a point which made me very much think. You Afghan Talibans have raised your Kalashnikov most of the time. We want to raise our pen. We want to make sure that everyone, not only in Afghanistan, women and men, but particularly women, and the rest of the world, will raise the pen in order to indicate you have the right, we have the right to continue studying, not only elementary school, university, find a job, have a profession, be part of the political process. We want to use our pen. You should not take it away from us.
Thank you so much, Stefan. The power of the pen over the gun and making this a strong argument. I remember so well that funding conference in Tokyo, and you were absolutely right. You certainly played a very strong role there, but there was a united community of international actors on this issue. So thank you for that. You know, as Stefan has been talking about the international community, Nargis, I want to go back to you on the domestic community within Afghanistan. How do you make the argument for women's rights in a very traditional society, to Afghan men in particular? And are there growing numbers of allies in the traditional political circles for women's rights? Because obviously the coming together of the Afghan community is critically important as well.
Thank you. But before going to your points, Milan, let me make few remarks with regard to what Stefan De Mistura said. I think reminding ourselves constantly on why you came to Afghanistan and why we spend so much of the blood and treasure in the country is something very important, and it can be very strong when it comes to international supporters of Afghanistan, such as yourself and De Mistura and others, is very much important, because when we are talking about that, everyone is thinking, especially those that they want to have a quick fix in Afghanistan, they think that we are asking that because we are very desperate because of our rights. No, when we are talking about all those things, it's about the universal principles of human rights, women's rights, freedom that we are talking about, that all of us are as responsible for upholding to that. So I think constant reminding of the politicians is very much important about the first time that they came and they got engaged in Afghanistan. And with regard to condition-based support, I totally agree with that. One of the questions that I keep on asking our international allies and as well as the government and the women, I said, let's ask ourselves one question, that during 2002, when we had the first conference in Bonn in Afghanistan, and then after that, we had the Constitutional Royal Jirga, and we had so many other events for development of Afghanistan, would Afghan women be given the chances, opportunities, and platform that they were given if their voices were not supported by the international community? Do you think Mujahideen would have accepted Afghan women the way that they accepted in 2002? Absolutely not. If they are not that rigid, they were not so different in terms of their ideology, in terms of treatment of women. So the reason that they accepted that, because they knew in order to build partnership with the international community, in order to access the resources, in order to stay in power, they had no choice but to make sure that they were respecting women's rights, minorities' rights, and all other democratic values. So it's very much important that while moving ahead with the peace process, we ensure that we are upholding to that. We are constantly sending the same message to the Taliban that we are going to stand together and we are all going to defend these values because it's important for all of us. And the third point that I want to make is the issue of mediation. Some of the international colleagues and as well as Afghans keep on saying that since Afghan women have not been party to any conflict in the last 4 decades, they could be very good mediators between the Taliban as well as the government. But my point is that when when the peace deal would come, no matter how good would that be, but still the first and the biggest loser are going to be Afghan women. The men might lose few government positions, few ministries, few governor position, few a cabinet position. But Afghan women will basically lose some of their basic rights. So it's very much important for us that while the Taliban are talking and negotiating with the government, they have to understand that they have to equally engage with the government, with the women. They have to bring us on board. We have to reason with them. They have to reason with us. And we have to make sure that this dialogue is actually continuing. And encouraging Afghan women to be mediators is I think is not right, because we have to constantly be at the peace talk and we have to defend our rights. And as you said, we have to build our alliances. Now, coming to building alliances, some of the progress that we have made, I want to highlight, though I think that they are not enough, still, especially because of COVID, many of our advocacy and lobby activities have been affected, but I hope that we'll be able to continue with them, because domestic support is very much important for us. So Afghan women from different sectors are working together, especially we are working very closely with the negotiation team, and we are very happy with the number of women that we have in the negotiation team, and we hope that we'll be able to continue to have these dialogues, and we keep on gathering data from the field and collecting different perspectives, and we keep on feeding to them so that that will enable them to have the updated information, perspectives, and based on that negotiate with the Taliban. A few days back, a large number of women had a meeting with President Ghani, and there is some of their concerns about the peace process, especially about the lack of engagement of the male members of the negotiation team with women, because what we see that whenever there are meetings happening in the Ministry of Peace Affairs about the women issue, we see that women members of the negotiation team are attending, but none of the male members are attending. So it's very much important that the male members have also begun, and we also engage with them to make sure that they understand our perspective. And I think some of them that we see in the list, we can engage with them, and they could be very strong advocates of women's rights. According to the information that we have today, a group of Afghan women had a meeting with Dr. Abdullah, and the message that they conveyed to him was about meaningful participation of women, especially when we are moving towards the establishment of the National Reconciliation Council for Peace that he's heading. Right now, a number of Afghan women leaders are receiving training on their Islamic rights, and the trainers are Afghan men. And I'm also one of the participants. And I'm really amazed with the way that these male participants are educating us and providing us the Islamic information that how we can reason with the Taliban. What are the verses of the Holy Quran or the saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that we'll be using against and how we can reason with them. And I'm amazed to see how passionately they're convincing us that we can win this and we can actually overcome this challenge. And they are committed to work with us, and we have to make sure that we're expanding these alliances. In terms of male members of the civil society, there are several platforms that we have built up, and we have to make sure that we're continuously engaged with them. But there's also one reality, one confession that I want to make as Afghan woman, that, and the reason that I want to make that is just to encourage ourselves that we get out of our comfort zones. So we are engaging very easily with the men that they are like-minded, they're thinking like that, like us, and they don't challenge us, or they are the true believers of the democracy and true believers of the human rights. But when it comes to the men, whether they are Taliban or they're non-Taliban, that they don't believe in those values that we believe because of whatever reasons, we have not been able to engage very actively with them. And by attending this course myself, many of us have concluded the time has come that we have to get out of our comfort zones, and time has come that we have to begin engaging with men and women that they're not thinking like us. They don't agree and they don't support what we are saying, but still we should be able to engage with them. We should be able to listen to them. We should be able to reason to them so that we are able to build trust and we are able to expand our circle of allies. This is doable, and I think this will help us a lot, especially one of the reasons that I'm sure you're also hearing that people are using not only the Taliban, but also money that politicians and others, that they want to weaken the position and situation of Afghan women, they keep on saying that, oh, what is demanded by urban women is not echoed or is not supported by women in rural Afghanistan. And it disappoints me when I see that international colleagues have also begun to believe that. Please do not believe that. And I have a very simple argument for that. Is every woman in the United States thinking the way that you are thinking, Milan Verveen? Are they thinking the way that Secretary Albright is thinking? Are they thinking the way that Michelle Obama is thinking, Hillary Clinton is thinking, or many other US women leaders are thinking? No, because of the vision that you're having, because of the responsibility and education that you're having, you're feeling more responsible. Even out of US, you're responsible for women that are living in Afghanistan. But every US woman, they may care about it, but they will not be as actively advocating for women support the way that you are doing because of the responsibilities. So same thing goes with Afghan women. I mean, there is no division between women in Kabul or in urban, between women that they are living in rural, but it's just a matter of the responsibilities. Everyone is not an activist. Those that they're activists, whether they are living in Kabul or they are living in Uruzgan or any other province of Afghanistan, they are raising their voice for women's support. But expecting the women that they are mothers and they are living in the families and expecting all of them to be the activists and to raise this voice the same way that other women are raising, I think this is a very high and unrealistic expectation. And I believe that this is just being used as a tool to weaken our position. And my question that I keep on saying, they say that women in Kabul, they cannot represent women that they are living in the rural areas of Afghanistan. My question is that, what about those men that they are having dual passports? Their families are not even living in Afghanistan. They are just a political tourist in this country. They can represent each and every man of Afghanistan. And there's no question about their legitimacy, but there's a question about our legitimacy, that we are living in this country, we are struggling in this country, and we are day and night, we are putting every effort that we can for well-being of our people. And then with regard to Taliban, they are a small group. They show us one district that the whole population would stand with them, would support their stand that they have. They don't have that much of constituency. They are a bunch of small group of people that they have been committing constant violence to terrorize people and just come and take over Kabul and power by violence. They have the legitimacy and people are listening to them. Nobody's questioning their representation. Nobody's questioning their legitimacy, but only when it comes to women, the bar is so high and the expectations are so high that they want us to be all united around 16 million people, and we should not have any divisions. I mean, diversity is something that all of us are praising and embracing in democracy, but only when it comes to Afghan women, everybody is saying that you should come from one platform, you should have one voice, and there is no way that you'll accept that you have division of any kind of division of thinking. Why not? We should embrace that diversity and we should encourage that.
Okay, Nargis, thank you so much. We're running out of time, and I want to be able to quickly ask questions of Shukria and Stefan, but also we want to take audience questions. So if we can keep our responses short. Shukria, just following up on some of what we heard from Nargis, what is meaningful participation for women? You know, so often the response is, look, we've got 4 women on this negotiating committee, and it's as though that's the beginning and the end. What more do you want? And also an argument we often hear is that these are values foisted on Afghan women by the West, and that Afghanistan is a traditional society, and these issues are somehow out of step. Can you sort of set the record straight on that?
Sure. First of all, let me tell you the position of Afghan women more than 100 years from now. We had a women as ministers. So the same society as we live today, it was more vibrant, more liberal than today we are. My mom had more rights and freedom than I had it at the moment. So I think bringing the excuse of it's a very traditional society, it's a male-dominated society. So we are here to change that perspective and behavior, because actually we are not been such a traditional society as it's been described. And why everyone thinks few women and the negotiation team is really a great gift or honor or sacrifice for Afghan women, I strongly believe that Afghan women deserve to be counted as a citizens, not as a second citizens. And we cannot call peace without absence of women. We should be in the table and on the menu. That's very important. And besides, it's really hurt when 50% of the citizen being in this country to be ignored. I believe meaningful inclusions means being a decision maker in every layer of the political power, social power. We should be accepted as a reality as we are in our country. And I believe the sacrifice of women shouldn't be ignored. The Afghan women already been victim of war. It's injustice that they should be also victim for temporary peace. And that's why I believe meaningful participation is not about number. It's about quality. It's about commitment. It's about political will. It's about having a voice and concern of women and every single steps of during the negotiation. And a few women just being on the table. So yes, when 5 women are facing more than 45 men, it's injustice. At least 50-50 should maybe something. If Taliban believe in claiming they are leading Afghanistan, which women are representing Taliban? Why they don't have a female supporter? Why we don't have yet a single student from the area where it's under Taliban control, that they should give us the symbol that, okay, she had been graduated from school. So that means the Taliban perspective are very dark about women. But what about the government? What about the international community? What about us? I think we are reality. They can see us in their house, in the politics and markets and bazaar and everywhere. But why we should be just in the box? And why they should think that having a few women, it's a great privilege for women, and they should zip their mouth. And those women was been nominated by their own political alliance, not from the women with Afghanistan to represent. So for me, meaningful participation, it means being counted from starting from the points of view till the rights we've been seeking for and the achievement we had it for. I think a democratic society cannot be shaped without the presence of women.
Thank you. Stefan, let's just tap for a moment your experience as a mediator. What are your recommendations at this time as the ground is being paved, so to speak, for potential talks? What should be a negotiating strategy that, and the factors that should enter into that strategy that are critical?
Thank you, Madeleine. Can I ask you one thing? I would be very much interested if we gave the floor also to Ambassador Schuurman, or are you planning to do so before we end? Because she represents here, in a way, EU, Europe, and a rich and important country there. Because one of the keys for the strategy I would like to suggest is based on what I just mentioned. Taliban's youth are claiming that you are changing your attitude regarding women and human rights. Well, you may claim that just because you want to have all of us out of the view and be able to take over power in Afghanistan. But if you believe that Europe in particular and the US and other countries are ready to fund again Afghanistan for the time being in order to make sure it doesn't collapse, because it is in a very difficult situation, there are conditionalities. And they are women, number one, women, number two, human rights in general. So can I give my timing to Ambassador Schuurman, and then I will come back if you feel that there is still time, because you just mentioned we are running out of time. Over to you.
Well, always the diplomat, Stefan, and indeed we do want to hear from Ambassador Schuurman. So let me introduce her to our audience, and I hope that people can stay with us longer so that we can get into some audience questions as well. So Ambassador Schuurman is coming to us from The Hague. She is currently the director of the Department of Stability and Humanitarian Aid in the Netherlands in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She previously served as the Dutch Human Rights Ambassador and made many trips to Afghanistan in that role. And she was also the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace, and Security. So you're exactly right, Stefan, and that's why she's here. She has so much experience in this space. So Marriët, I know we were going to leave you to the very end, but why don't you give us your perspective at this moment, and then if people can stay on a little bit longer, we'll go to audience questions.
Good, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. And first of all, let me say what a pleasure this is to be back with many familiar faces and voices. And as you introduced me, I think for me, I visited Afghanistan between 2015 and 2019 about 4 times. And for me, and the first time I visited Afghanistan was in the capacity of NATO Special Representative of Women, Peace and Security. For me, the Afghan women are and represent a story of hope to the world. Every time I visited or engaged with Afghan female leader at whatever their level was, their resilience, their courage and their leadership is really a story of hope to present to the world. And I just in preparing, and then I'll come back to the question of Stefan, preparing was thinking like, what did I learn? And I told many of my Afghan friends that before, but there's a few lessons that I really learned from Afghan women. Maybe the most important one, and I think Nargis and Shukria also echo that, is we are not victims, we are agents in our own right. We have a diversity of opinions. The president actually earlier today, the president of Afghanistan mentioned the ARIA formula meeting yesterday in the Security Council. And he was quite agitated in saying that Afghan women do not need facilitation. Look at what they spoke up yesterday in the Security Council. They are agents. They have a voice. They have a story to tell. They don't need facilitation. I think that was a very strong message. So I think that is a very important lesson. The other lesson is that this has been a decades-long struggle of women and human rights defenders in Afghanistan. And we as an international community came in maybe only in the last 19, or maybe more correctly, the last 10 years in backing up that support. But I think the other real lesson for me is that we will lead the way. This is our fight. We will reconquer our past of equal rights and human dignity. Just back us up, but it's our struggle. And there maybe, to cut this short, I think the back us up is critical. I think the conditions that we spoke about. I think yesterday, actually in Kabul, in the side events that they were there for the senior officials meeting, which prepares for the donor conference in November. But on peace and development, I think it was actually the US representative ambassador who said, we will not support any development plan unless there is proven equal participation. And that was echoed by all other major donors. So for us as the Netherlands, we're currently leading the Nordic Plus group together with the 5th donor. But I think that's a shared commitment. That's the least I would say we can do. We need practical proof also from the Taliban that they're serious about equal rights and participation. For us to invest, as you rightfully said, in a country where we invested a lot, not only money, but also lives, but first and foremost, where Afghans themselves invested heavily in. And we will not allow that to slip and keep supporting them. And I think the other aspect there is that's not only for the reconstruction phase or post-peace agreement phase, it actually, that very strict and tough conditionality has to come in now, if ever there's going to be our support for intra-Afghan talks. As I said, you know, no facilitation. We don't need capacity building. We don't need a second or a third track, but we need the Afghan women to be at the table, not in the back seats. And we have, if we as international community are not very strict on and clear about conditions and terms on which we support inter-Afghan talks, then we basically weaken the position of the Afghan women, and we basically give credits and legitimacy to the Taliban that they can have it their way. And I think we have to be really strict. You can only have it our way or the way of your women. And this, they need a seat at the table, and also make sure that whatever peace deal will be reached, it will guarantee the Bill of Rights of the Afghan constitution, and it will guarantee equal participation. We have to be very tough. We have not only the power of the pen, but then also the power of the purse. And we have to use that cleverly. I'm not sure if Stefan is reassured.
Stefan, did you want to add anything to what Marriët just said?
Well, I liked very much what we heard, and that's exactly the strategy. We have to be laser beamed on that. And you will see they will blink, but we need to be focused on that. They cannot afford simply to win what they believe of war. They need to win the peace. Otherwise, they will lose everything. They already lost everything once. So they got that message. But what they didn't get is whether they have to change in order to be part of civil society. So I liked it. And if you want to say in 2 words, the strategy is exactly that one.
Excellent.
Link it to conditionality.
Yes. And I remember that's something you understated, or actually stated quite strongly in your op-ed about the importance of the conditionality in all of this. So I want to go over a little bit just to accommodate. We have a fabulous group of people listening in today, many excellent questions. Our responses, we've got to make them tighter and more concise so we can accommodate some of the questions. Ali, do you want to give us those, please?
Sure. We have a number of questions in the category of how can global partners really support the efforts of global women? What role can women and civil society from regions around the world play? One specific question from Monica McWilliams in Northern Ireland. What proposals can you add to what we're already doing in other countries to ensure your inclusion and future participation in Afghan decision-making?
So maybe Shukria or Nargis, very briefly, you could respond to what more could happen from the international community.
Yes, sure. I'll try to be brief to make sure that I'm also giving time to Shukria John, because I'm sure that she also has some point. I think one thing with regard to support, conditionality of support is important, because all the countries that they're providing support, they're meeting on regular basis with the Afghan counterparts, and they are making commitments on regular basis for Afghanistan reconstruction, which includes everything. But there's one thing that I want to highlight, that looking at the conditions and benchmarks that are coming from donors in the last 20 years, especially with regard to corruptions. If we adopt the same strategy that we keep on just slightly reminding the government and Afghan counterparts about the corruption, but don't do anything serious about it, while we see that corruption is increasing day by day, if we continue the same pattern with regard to women's rights, I think we'll be in big trouble. So it's very much important that we come up with a proper monitoring mechanism and engagement of the, especially Afghan civil society, that while we are coming with the benchmarks, we are also coming up with a mechanism that we are monitoring, and we are having the indicator which are showing whether the Afghan counterparts are doing good or they are doing worse. And then based on that, we should be able, and we should have the coordination amongst them international partners, that they come together and they make a decision about it. Otherwise, what will happen that we'll continue complaining about women's right corruption, but then what we see that every day we are losing and things are changing against the women's right rather than in favor of women's right. The last point that I want to make is the matter of resources. The peace process also started in quite earlier, before now. And I remember Madam Secretary Clinton, that when he left the State Department, the last favor and support that she provided to Afghan women was allocation of more than 300 million resources for empowerment of Afghan women. So that actually came finally on board, and that helped a lot Afghan women in terms of their economic empowerment, their engagement in the civil society, and also their training in the leadership and capacity building. What we see that while the peace process has started, we see a very limited resources coming and helping Afghan women, that they get more active, they mobilize other women, they build alliances with men, and they have more, they create more of the platforms to raise their voices. So my recommendation would be that we also provide resources and support to Afghan women, but make sure that Afghan women are in the driving seat, they are leading everything, so that we are not blamed once again by everybody that, oh, everything is done by the international community for you, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to do it yourselves. I think bringing more resources, and also making sure the monitoring mechanism on whatever benchmark we put on international community, that we are closely and seriously monitoring that, and we are taking serious actions if they are not respected by the Afghan counterparts.
Thank you. Shukria? We can't hear you.
Yeah,
if you could.
I believe what, yeah, I believe what, and I'll echo what Ambassador De Mistura and Nargis said, but allow me to ask for something very different. From my point of view, when peace processes start, it needs international monitoring team before the conditionality will come. I believe United States of America, United Nations, EU, European Union, Islamic conference countries, and other countries which is they have the experience of this peace process, they should monitor the Afghan peace process. That and they should make and ensure that everyone is on board, including women and those democratic values, which is our common, let's say, values and common sense, at least for the peace process. And I believe strongly the women's solidarity around the globe, particularly when it comes to the women. I think we can count on United States women rights activists and like-minded human rights and women's rights organizations, and those people which is, they are Congress, Senate, and other international organizations, that they should stand for peace and stability in Afghanistan beside of Afghan women. And I strongly believe conditionality, not just only for the women, but also to tackle the corruption and to ensure the democratic principle and with the frame of the Afghan constitution will be remaining as a great value for the peace deal.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know there were questions having to do with the regional players, and this monitoring issue is certainly a very good idea in my view. Ali, can we go one more round?
Sure. I'll bundle two questions in here. There's many questions on how progress endures after the talks, from Palwasha Kakar at USIP. How can we ensure that women are not able, but also for sharing agreement that will be the result? And how can a negotiated peace settlement ensure that opportunities for women continue to grow in all areas of the country post-peace? And then we'll do one other, if someone wants to touch on ensuring diversity of Afghan women's voices are heard. How are we ensuring that the voices of all Afghan women are heard and that their grievances are brought up in the intra-Afghan dialogue and beyond?
So we have a couple of questions here, and Certainly one has to do with what happens after these talks, assuming they go forward in a way that leads to something productive. But what happens? And I think our international participants mentioned the whole issue of funding and what goes into that. And then the question in terms of Afghan women's participation in other ways. So anybody who wants to take an aspect of this or something that's on your mind that we haven't addressed, but let's do it concisely and let's make this the last round. So we'll start with Stefan and then go to Marriott and wind up with our 2 Afghan panelists.
Did I lose myself? Yes, I think I did.
We lost.
Here I
there
am.
you are.
Yeah.
You're back.
Yes, thank you. Good. Well, basically what could happen, and based on experience happens, is we're having negotiations. They last a long time. The monitoring system that you are talking about should be there. Otherwise, you may just see the Taliban prolonging the discussions, meanwhile, encroaching territorially until there is no discussion anymore. We have seen that happening, okay? We're seeing it in Syria now with the government. You discuss or pretend to discuss, meanwhile you progress from their point of view in a territorial victory, which is not going to lead anywhere because you need a victory on peace. So monitoring with the international community, conditionality, immediately a donor conference. You have a ceasefire and then you have a donor conference, always like that. That's the time when what Marriott was referring to and I was too, we need the West, the world, who have been involved in Afghanistan to show we are not living a no exit strategy here. It is actually a changing of situation. That's crucial. Immediately afterwards, you will start seeing some type of danger of the Taliban asking for some ministries. And imagine they take education or cultural or religious ministries and then start saying, yes, but women should go to school, but only to learn how to write and read. Not enough no need for them to go to university. That's the time when the conditionality will start again. In other words, a process which needs to be accompanied by the international community. I will stop there.
Marriott?
Yes, always takes time to unmute, as you said. Maybe just to add 2 things. I think 2 aspects that came up earlier that I think are particularly relevant if you look at the further process. One is the time. I think it was particularly Shukri who mentioned the long-term versus the short-term. And I think generally this as international community is our biggest pitfall. We have a very short-term focus. And when we started to get involved with Afghanistan, we knew we would be in it for the long haul. We invested a lot, not as much as the Afghans themselves, but still, but we also should accept the consequences that also when it comes to negotiating an intra-Afghan peace talk, Afghan-owned, Afghan-led, we should be very clear that we have the time, but we do have conditions that it has to meet. So not to give any player at the table the impression that we're eager to pull back all our international engagement in Afghanistan and then they can have it their way anyhow. So I think time is of the essence. The conditions are of the essence, not only for the peace, for the development process, but also precisely for our support to the peace process. We as the Netherlands really sort of focus that with our capacity together with other international partners involved in the peace process in trying to focus on just and inclusive peace. So no peace without justice and no peace without inclusion. That means both participation, equal participation in the peace process, but also due attention to victim-centered or survivor-centered justice, to the grievances on all sides to be taken into account. So that the time factor is I think critical, the conditioning also of our involvement in the peace process, and not to be too short-sighted. And finally, as I said, the power of the pen. I think actually it was Monica McWilliams, if she's in here, that taught me this thing, that all the things that she learned in the Ireland peace process, there was one thing they forgot, and that was as a women representatives to negotiate for themselves. So power of the pen is also to make sure that whatever peace agreement is there basically sustains and guaranteed equal dignity and rights for all Afghan women, girls, boys and men. So the power of the purse is one thing, power of the pen is extremely important, particularly to make sure that the peace deal is really lasting and not a short term, but has a long-term impact.
Thanks so much, Marriott. Well said. Shukria?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think nothing left for me to say, but except one thing. I think it's a very critical time. It's very crucial. It's very important for Afghan women to have all the international support with us. But as I mentioned before, the lack of political will is quite visible. I cannot trust Afghan men politicians. So on the table of negotiation, because at the moment power is like a cake and each of them were just slicing and having their own part. What about women when we don't have a strong women on the table, plus we don't have a international support to push Afghan men that no, this is the share of women in Afghanistan. And I strongly believe the conditionality plus the solidarity. That's what we need. And how we can ensure the Afghan women rights will be safe, it's not an easy task. I believe we have to pay more attention. We need to set a platform, and we should have an echo the same message from different addresses with the same points of view. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nargis, to conclude?
Thank you. To build up on what the rest of the speakers, and especially Ms. Barakzai, have said, I want to make 4 points as concluding remarks. First of all, I think inclusion of a woman, especially strong and outspoken women with proven track record of struggling always for women's inclusion and women's rights, and the peace structure is important. As mentioned, right now we have a 4 peace structure, but we're hoping that soon the government would be able to address this issue. But when we are having these structures merged or new structure established, we have to make sure that women are meaningfully participating in that process and they're included in that process. And I always keep on saying, I said, look at the quality of the negotiators that we have from the Taliban side. 10 people would be talking for 10 hours, still cannot convince 1 person of them. We have to make sure that we are bringing women of that caliber in the process, to be able to talk to them, to be able to reason with them. Building domestic consensus about women's meaningful inclusion is important, and that should not include only the government, but all other politicians, because all of them are one way or the other way through different structures or communicating with the international community. So making sure that all of them are upholding and all of them are taking this commitment forward for inclusion of women in the process is really important. Meaningful participation of women, especially at the substance level, and preparing women in that process is important. That means that we should be able to begin to have track 2, track 3, track 4 dialogues amongst ourselves with other groups in the society. We should continue to engage women in the region, especially Muslim women, women from Pakistan, women from Iran, 2 important neighborhoods of Afghanistan that we know that their contribution and their support for sustainability of peace is very much important. We should be able to build those consensus domestically, should have those dialogue domestically. We should be able to have it in the region, and then with solidarity and continuous advocacy at international level.
Thank you so much, Nargis. So our conversation has come to a close. It's always difficult to say so much in so little time, but this could go on. But the most important thing to remember is that even though this discussion is over, the hard work for all of us, no matter where we sit on this issue, continues. And as has been said, we must be into this for the long haul, because that's in the end what will count. You know, I was relating to what Marriott said about one of her visits to Afghanistan, and I remember vividly one time when I was in Kabul, meeting with a group of women. And the first one that evening in a conversation said to me, "Stop looking at us as victims and look at us as the leaders that we are." And that has stayed with me all of these years, because we don't cast enough attention on the leadership that Afghan women represent. And that is going to be more important than ever. Our goal is to, and our need is to back them up, but they are the leaders. They know what needs to be done. And I hope the process will be such that that leadership will be able to manifest itself and make a real difference, as it has been over many years now for Afghanistan into the future. So thank you. I want to thank Secretary Albright. I want to thank Nargis and Shukria for being the voices of Afghan women today. And we wish you well and Godspeed in everything going forward. I want to thank Stefan De Mistura for long being a voice on the importance of these issues, and to Marriët Schuurman. You have added greatly, all of you, to this discussion. Your leadership and commitment has made a great deal. This is in some ways like a reunion for some of us, because many of you have been at this for a long time. But you've also made us smarter on this topic. And I think it's really important that we better understand the stakes, we better understand the need for solidarity, and we better understand the obligations for each and every one of us going forward. So thank you, and let's continue in all the ways that we can. And to our audience, thank you for joining us, and until next time, goodbye to everybody.